It was one of those warm Florida afternoons where time seemed to move a little slower. The sun dipping lazily behind palm trees. The air filled with laughter from retirees chatting about golf scores and grandkids. Inside a cozy community center in Sarasota, two lives unknowingly took a turn that would change everything. Robert Bob Whitaker, a 72-year-old retired mechanical engineer, sat quietly at a corner table during the Senior Social Club's monthly mixer. He wasn't there looking for love. After losing his wife of 46 years to cancer, Bob had spent the past 5 years drifting through life with a kind of quiet emptiness. Attending church, tinkering with his old Chevy, visiting his son every other weekend. His days had become predictable, emotionless, and gray. Then Eleanor Ellie Dawson walked in. Ellie was 68, petite, with kind eyes and a soft, musical laugh that carried across the room. A retired elementary school teacher, she had lost her husband just 2 years earlier to a sudden heart attack. Unlike Bob, Ellie hadn't given up on life. She loved gardening, writing poetry, and volunteering at the local animal shelter. Her friends often teased her that she still had the spark of a young woman in her heart, and they weren't wrong. When the two were introduced by a mutual friend, there was an instant connection. Bob later told his son, "I don't know what it was, but talking to her felt like remembering something I didn't know I'd forgotten." Over the next few months, that connection deepened. They went on slow walks by the marina, shared breakfasts at Ellie's favorite cafe, and discovered they both adored old Frank Sinatra records. To their families, it was surprising but heartwarming. Two people who had weathered the hardest storms of life, finding warmth again in each other's company. Their courtship was gentle, almost old-fashioned. No fancy dinners or extravagant gifts, just conversations that stretched into the night, laughter over shared memories, and a quiet comfort in each other's presence. Ellie once told a friend, "Bob makes me feel safe again. He listens. He's patient. After losing so much, I didn't think I'd ever smile like this again." After only 9 months together, Bob proposed. It wasn't grand or showy. One evening, during a walk on Siesta Key Beach, as the sunset painted the sky gold and pink, Bob pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. His hands trembled slightly as he said, "Ellie, I know we don't have forever, but whatever time we have left, I want to spend it with you." She said yes, tears glimmering in her eyes. They married 3 months later in a simple garden ceremony behind Ellie's daughter's home. The white chairs were decorated with pastel ribbons. A small live jazz band played "The Way You Look Tonight," and both families came together in joyful celebration. Their children toasted to love's second chance. And for that moment, everything felt right. But even on that perfect day, there were faint, invisible cracks beneath the surface. Some of Ellie's friends noticed that Bob had moments of possessiveness, subtle but telling. He often interrupted her conversations, answered questions meant for her, and seemed uncomfortable when she spoke to male guests. When asked about it later, Ellie brushed it off with a smile. "He's just protective," she said. "He's been through a lot. We both have." After the wedding, Bob began talking about taking Ellie somewhere special. Somewhere that would mark the beginning of their new life together. She had always dreamed of seeing the Bahamas' turquoise water, the white sand, the kind of paradise she had only seen in travel magazines. So, for their honeymoon, Bob booked a 7-day luxury Bahama cruise aboard the Caribbean Star, a massive floating resort that promised romance, relaxation, and memories to last a lifetime. It was meant to be their dream trip, their final adventure together. Neither of them knew that it would also be the last journey Ellie would ever take. The Caribbean Star Cruise was more than just a ship. It was a floating palace. With 12 decks, 5 restaurants, 3 pools, and nightly entertainment, it promised a once-in-a-lifetime experience. For newlyweds Robert and Ellie Whitaker, it was the perfect way to celebrate their new beginning, a second chance at happiness on the open sea. The cruise departed from Miami Port on a breezy Sunday afternoon. Ellie wore a wide-brimmed sun hat and a floral dress, holding onto Bob's arm as they boarded. She was practically glowing with excitement, greeting other passengers, snapping photos of the ship, and waving goodbye to the harbor. Bob, though smiling, seemed quieter. taking in the massive vessel and the crowd of tourists bustling around them. He wasn't fond of crowds or noise, but for Ellie's sake, he played along. As they settled into their ocean view cabin on Deck 9, Ellie unpacked carefully, placing framed photos of her grandchildren on the dresser and organizing her floral blouses in the small closet. Bob teased her for nesting like we're moving in, and they both laughed. That first evening, the couple attended the captain's welcome dinner, where guests dressed elegantly to toast the beginning of their voyage. Witnesses later recalled how radiant Ellie looked that night, laughing, dancing, and chatting with fellow passengers. Bob, glass of whiskey in hand, seemed proud but slightly possessive. When another man complimented Ellie's smile, Bob pulled her close and said, "She's all mine." It was said jokingly, but even then, there was a hint of edge beneath his tone. Over the next few days, the cruise drifted through paradise. They stopped at Nassau, Coco Cay, and Freeport, exploring local markets and walking along the pristine beaches. Ellie loved every moment. She took pictures of the turquoise water, collected seashells, and even convinced Bob to pose for a few photos with her on the deck. Those images would later appear in news reports, capturing the illusion of joy that masked the storm ahead. But not everything was perfect behind closed doors. Cabin attendants later reported overhearing heated arguments between the couple. Muffled voices, sharp tones, then silence. One night, Ellie was seen alone at the upper deck bar, sipping white wine and quietly humming to herself. When the bartender asked if everything was all right, she smiled and said softly, "Just married life. Takes some getting used to." Bob's drinking had also become more frequent. He was known to visit the casino bar late into the night, playing slot machines and chatting with younger guests. According to another passenger, Bob once joked that Ellie still liked to act like a teenager, and that she'd forget she's got a husband sometimes. His words, while spoken with a laugh, hinted at jealousy and control simmering beneath the surface. By the fourth day, tension had become noticeable. Ellie confided in a friendly older couple they'd met on board that Bob had a temper, nothing violent, but unpredictable. "He's different when he drinks," she said. "He gets suspicious, like I'm doing something wrong when I'm just trying to enjoy the trip." The couple advised her to talk to him calmly, maybe spend some time apart during the day. Ellie nodded but didn't seem convinced. She wanted peace. She wanted to believe this was just stress or seasickness, not a sign of something darker. On the fifth evening, the ship hosted a formal gala, the grand event of the cruise. Guests arrived in their finest attire. Ellie wore a navy blue evening gown, her hair pinned back, looking every bit the glowing bride. Bob wore a gray suit, already tipsy before dinner even began. During the meal, Ellie laughed and chatted with a table of fellow travelers. Bob, however, seemed increasingly agitated, refilling his drink again and again. One witness later told investigators, "He looked angry, not loud, just simmering. Every time Ellie smiled at someone, he stared at her like he was keeping score." When dessert was served, Bob suddenly stood up and muttered that he was going back to the cabin. Ellie hesitated, then followed him minutes later. Surveillance cameras captured the couple walking down the corridor toward cabin 9B-14 at 10:45 p.m. Ellie looked calm. Bob's fists were clenched. It was the last time anyone saw her alive. When morning broke over the calm Caribbean waters, the Caribbean star sparkled under a sky so clear it looked painted. But inside cabin 9B-14, the air was thick, a silence that felt heavy, suffocating, unnatural. The night before had started with laughter, champagne, and music, and ended in something unthinkable. According to later investigation reports, the couple returned to their cabin just before 11 p.m. Passengers in neighboring rooms recalled hearing raised voices, muffled shouting, the sound of something being knocked over, then silence. One guest later told detectives she heard a woman crying softly through the thin cabin walls. It sounded like someone trying to calm the other down, and then there was a loud thud. Security footage from the hallway showed no one entering or leaving after that. Just one closed door hiding a violent tragedy. Earlier that evening, Ellie had seemed happy. She had even spoken to the ship's photographer about buying a framed picture from the gala dinner, one where she and Bob smiled under twinkling lights. But behind that smile, friends later said, was a growing fear she didn't want to admit. In private conversations before the cruise, Ellie had told her daughter that Bob could be jealous in strange ways. He didn't like when she dressed up or talked to strangers for too long. Sometimes he just gets this look, she had said. Like he's not seeing me. Like he's seeing someone else through me. That night, witnesses said Bob had been drinking heavily. He downed scotch after scotch at the gala bar, ignoring Ellie's pleas to slow down. When she tried to take his glass away, he snapped at her, loud enough for others to turn and look. Moments later, he apologized, kissed her hand, and led her away. The classic pattern of charm after cruelty. When investigators pieced together the days before the murder, a clear pattern appeared. Control, jealousy, and emotional volatility. Crew members reported that Bob constantly checked where Ellie was. If she was late returning from the spa or pool, he'd question staff about her whereabouts. One even recalled him accusing a waiter of flirting with his wife after a simple exchange about dinner options. Still, Ellie remained patient. To others, she often minimized his behavior, saying things like, "He's just protective." It's kind of sweet in a way. But in truth, she had begun to feel trapped, confined by his unpredictable moods even in the middle of paradise. Onboard medical staff would later tell authorities that Ellie visited the ship's clinic 2 days before her death, complaining of a bruised wrist. She said she had slipped in the shower. The nurse who attended her remembered how uneasy she seemed, avoiding eye contact, speaking softly. She kept saying it was nothing, the nurse recalled, but her hands trembled the entire time. On the final night of her life, everything came to a head. Bob was seen drinking at the casino bar while Ellie chatted with another couple from Minnesota. Witnesses said he glared at her from across the room before abruptly storming out. When Ellie noticed he had left, she excused herself and followed, still holding her wine glass. That was around 10:40 p.m. Minutes later, another passenger walking past their corridor heard what she described as an argument that turned into chaos. A man's voice shouting, then a crash. She hesitated, unsure whether to report it. It was a cruise, after all. Sometimes couples fought after a few drinks. She went back to her cabin. By sunrise, Ellie Dawson-Whitaker was dead. The next morning, room service knocked on their door around 8 a.m. No response. The staff assumed the couple was sleeping off a hangover and moved on. By 10 o'clock, with breakfast service ending, the same attendant returned. Still no answer. He noticed the door wasn't latched from inside, unusual for guests. When he finally opened it with his master key, what he saw made him drop the tray. Ellie lay motionless on the cabin floor near the bed, her body partially covered by a sheet. Her face was bruised, swollen, and streaked with dried blood. Furniture was overturned, a lamp broken, a bottle of wine shattered on the carpet. The mirror above the dresser had a spiderweb crack running across it, like the echo of violence frozen in glass. And on the balcony, Bob sat alone, staring blankly at the endless blue horizon. His white shirt was soaked with blood, hers. When the attendant gasped, Bob turned slowly and said in a flat, distant voice, "She fell. She just fell." He didn't move. He didn't cry. He just kept whispering the same words as crew members rushed in to call for help. But the scene told a different story, one written not by accident, but by rage. The discovery of Ellie Dawson-Whitaker's lifeless body on the morning of June 14, 2022, sent shockwaves through the Caribbean Star Cruise. What was supposed to be another bright day in paradise had turned into a crime scene floating hundreds of miles from the nearest port. At 10:12 a.m., the ship's captain was alerted to an onboard medical emergency in cabin 9B-14. When the first responders arrived, 2 ship medics and a security officer, they immediately realized it was far more than a medical situation. Ellie was cold to the touch, her injuries far too severe for any accident. Blood spatter marked the lower wall and sheets. Her left eye was swollen shut, and her cheekbone appeared fractured. The medics pronounced her dead at 10:18 a.m. Bob Whitaker remained seated on the balcony chair, staring out at the ocean. When an officer gently placed a hand on his shoulder, he flinched. His first words were quiet, almost rehearsed. She fell. We argued. She tripped, hit the table. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. He was trembling but eerily calm, the kind of calm that comes after chaos. The cabin looked like a hurricane had passed through it. A wine bottle lay broken near the bed, its neck snapped and blood on the shards. The bedsheets were twisted, one pillow torn open, and Ellie's pearl necklace had shattered, scattering beads across the floor. The carpet showed dark stains, and her wedding ring, just 3 months old, was found beneath the dresser, bent and smeared with blood. Investigators later determined the pattern of injuries didn't align with a fall. There were multiple impact wounds, on her head, shoulders, and arms. Bruises in different stages of coloration suggested prior abuse. Ellie had defensive wounds on her forearms and knuckles, proof that she had tried to fight back. The ship's security sealed off the cabin and notified authorities in the Bahamas, as the vessel was sailing under Bahamian jurisdiction at the time. The captain made a calm but serious announcement over the intercom. Due to an ongoing investigation, we ask all passengers to remain in designated areas. We appreciate your cooperation. What had started as a dream voyage now felt like a floating prison. Word spread fast. In the buffet line, near the pool, and through hushed whispers in the corridors, passengers speculated about the incident on Deck 9. Those who had seen or interacted with the couple were questioned by ship security. A retired couple from Minnesota recalled dining with Bob and Ellie the night before. She was sweet. She talked about her grandkids, about wanting to snorkel the next morning, said the woman. He kept interrupting her. When another man asked her a question, Bob just glared. It was uncomfortable. Another guest in the cabin next door described hearing a loud argument, followed by a woman crying. Then it went quiet, she said. Too quiet. I should have called someone. Several passengers mentioned seeing Bob drunk and stumbling through the hallway around midnight. One bartender remembered him ordering 2 drinks and muttering, "She embarrasses me in front of everyone." Ellie, on the other hand, had been seen earlier that night talking to the cruise photographer, smiling as she admired her picture from the gala. She told him she was having the best time. Those words would later haunt the photographer, who developed her last photograph the next morning. A snapshot of a woman who had no idea death was just hours away. By early afternoon, Bahamian authorities instructed the ship to anchor near Nassau, where law enforcement could board. Until then, Bob Whitaker was detained in a private lounge under security supervision. Ship cameras showed no one else entering their cabin between 10:45 p.m. and 8 a.m. No forced entry. No signs of robbery. The only person with Ellie that night was her husband. When questioned by the ship's chief of security, Bob repeated the same story. We argued. She wanted to go shopping alone tomorrow. I told her it's not safe. She got upset. She tripped and hit her head. I tried to help her, but she stopped breathing. His version didn't match the evidence. Blood spatter on the walls suggested blows delivered from a standing position, not a fall. And Ellie's injuries, severe facial trauma and broken ribs, indicated multiple strikes with either a fist or blunt object. Still, Bob stuck to his story. It was an accident. I didn't mean for her to get hurt. At 4:20 p.m., Bahamian police officers and an FBI legal attaché stationed in Nassau arrived by helicopter, airlifted directly to the Caribbean Star. Passengers gathered on the decks, whispering as they watched the chopper land. The officers boarded swiftly, escorted by ship security. Within an hour, the cabin was photographed, sealed, and declared an active homicide scene. Bob was officially taken into custody at 6:05 p.m. He didn't resist. As he was escorted down the corridor in handcuffs, witnesses described him as pale, hollow-eyed, and silent. He didn't look like a man crying for his wife, one passenger later said. He looked like a man who'd already accepted what he'd done. Ellie's body was moved to the ship's morgue, covered with a white sheet. The staff lowered the flag on the vessel to half-mast, a rare sign of respect on a cruise ship, and passengers gathered at sunset for a brief, silent vigil. The ocean was calm that night, the sunset beautiful, cruelly beautiful. As the ship drifted toward Nassau, carrying the broken remains of a honeymoon that had turned into a horror story, the dream was over. But the investigation had only just begun. The autopsy confirmed what investigators suspected. Ellie had been beaten to death. Her skull showed fractures from repeated blows, and her hands bore deep defensive wounds. This wasn't an accident or a fall. It was rage. Bob's blood alcohol level was 3 times over the legal limit. Her blood was found under his fingernails, and the bruising pattern matched his ring. The case shifted instantly from a tragic fall to a brutal homicide. News spread across the ship. Passengers were confined as police searched every inch for evidence. Rumors spiraled. Some said Bob confessed. Others claimed he'd gone mad. The captain made calm announcements, but fear lingered in the air. The dream cruise had turned into a floating crime scene. The FBI joined Bahamian detectives. Forensic teams reconstructed the timeline. A violent argument, a sudden outburst, Ellie's desperate attempt to defend herself. Blood patterns proved she was attacked near the bed, struck multiple times, and dragged before death. Bob's story about her falling collapsed completely. The evidence spoke louder than his denial. Under questioning, Bob cracked. He admitted to arguing over Ellie's wish to explore Nassau alone. She said she needed space, he mumbled. I lost it. His confession came with tears, but no true remorse. He was charged with second-degree murder and extradited to Florida. His family was in disbelief. Ellie's daughter said through tears, he promised her peace. He gave her pain. In court, prosecutors painted Bob as jealous and controlling. The defense blamed age and alcohol. Jurors watched security footage of the couple's last moments walking the corridor. Her calm, his fists clenched, took the jury less than 1 day to decide. Verdict: guilty. Bob Whitaker, 72, was sentenced to 35 years in prison, effectively a life sentence. As he was led away, he muttered, I loved her. I really did. Ellie's family held hands in silence. The love story that began with a sunset ended in a storm no one saw coming.